Today, as we sit here and record this, there are 703 million people globally that are drinking dirty water. So it's about 1 in 10, 1 in 11 people alive. So about 10% of the planet. So we've made some progress. 20 years ago, that was 1 billion. So we've grown global population and we've decreased the amount of people who are drinking dirty water.
Okay.
That said, it's twice the population of America.
Unreal.
So 2 Americas full of people globally are drinking dirty water. 80% of those people live in rural areas. So think, small towns and villages. 20% of those people live in cities.
Okay.
So Charity Water is only focused on the rural areas because those are the areas of greatest need. And that's also where the government funding hits last.
Okay.
So this is a story from Ethiopia. Vic has been there many times. I've been to Ethiopia 31 times now. So it's a country that I love. It's one of the countries of our greatest investment at Charity Water. And there's a huge need there. There are 40 million people plus in Ethiopia right now, in one country, drinking dirty water.
40 million is more people than like the greater New York City area, right?
Like 4 times more.
I live in Arizona and I think there's like 10 million people in Arizona. That's
okay.
like 4 Arizonas of people.
There you go. So, I was in Ethiopia. We'd been working there for a while. And I remember I was in this town in the north and kind of crappy. All the hotels are kind of crappy. $5 a night. You go into a hotel out in the rural area and you turn on the tap and it comes off in your hand. No shower curtains.
Yeah.
If the water works, maybe. So I was in a place like that and the hotel owner recognized me and he comes and he sits down and he says, "Hey, you're the Charity Water guy. The work you're doing here is really important." He goes, "Let me tell you a story." So he says, "I come from a rural village. It was called Maida." And he said, all the women in my village growing up, they used to walk 8 hours a day down to this ravine. And the water wasn't clean. And he said there was this one woman at the end of one of these walks one day before she reaches her house. She slips and she falls and she spills all the water. So she's just wasted 8 hours. And he said she took a rope and she hung herself from a tree. And I remember he saw the effect that had on me and the little group. And he said, "The work you're doing here is important." And then he just walked off. So I remember thinking at first, that's probably not true. That's some sort of exaggerated story that you tell a humanitarian aid worker who comes into your rural part of the country. But it really, I remember calling Vic and telling her, and it really nagged at me. And I wound up sending our local well drilling partner out to that village, which is really hard to get to. And then they sent me an email a couple weeks later saying, "Hey, this is true. There was a suicide in this village." And it was at a time, I think we were 10 years into Charity Water. I really wanted to reconnect. I was feeling burned out. The problem feels so big sometimes that, it could feel unsolvable or just so daunting. And I wanted to kind of connect with why are we doing this? The urgency. Mm-hmm. So I wound up living in the village for almost a week. And I remember it was so hard to get to. I flew to Ethiopia, to Addis, and then I flew up to the north to Mekelle. And then I drove 4 hours and then the road ended. And then I rented a camel and a donkey for like $100. And then I put my tent in my sleeping bag. And then I walked 9 hours to get to this village.
Oh, so you literally like rode on camelback to this
No,
village?
I walked. My stuff was on the camel and the donkey.
Oh, wait, why did you not ride the camel?
I don't know. Nobody invited me to ride the camel. It was another farmer's. Maybe it was not a riding camel.
Really?
I was not invited to ride the camel. I think the camel had provisions for some of the other group. And maybe the camel didn't like to be ridden. It was an ornery camel. I mean, I've heard camels are not very nice. So.
Okay. I've never ridden a camel or been around camels, so I wouldn't know. I would not be the guy to ask.
The camel, I just remember my tent was on the camel.
Okay.
And my little solar backpack.
Okay.
So we reached this village, like it took us two or 3 days to get there. And I remember so I camped out next to the chief's kind of very small hut. And I remember meeting the mom who told me about her daughter and said, many people that know about Charity Water are familiar with these yellow cans. They're kind of like the fuel cans that you would imagine putting diesel in your, or fuel in the riding mower, or your gasoline. So that's kind of the symbol of water in Africa. And they're ubiquitous now, but when at the time of this incident, people were using clay pots, which are very heavy. So the water is heavy. 5 pounds of water weighs 40 pounds. One of the things at Charity Water we've done for years is, 5 gallons of water weighs 40 pounds.
Okay.
A clay pot weighs another 10 pounds. As I was in the village, they were showing me the old clay pots that they had used that were now replaced by these jerry cans. And you would see a clay pot sitting there, and it would have a kind of a rope tied around the neck of it. Anyway, I walked with the women down to the source, and it was hours to get down. It was kind of this treacherous, skinny little path down the side of a mountain. You get to the bottom of the source, which is this little trickle of water kind of coming out of the rocks that then turns to mud because so many people are standing there. And there's so little water that there's all these pots and jerry cans lined up because the yield is so low that you have to wait. So all that to say, I'm going into this village and people are walking hours. They're waiting for dirty water. So I walked in her footsteps, and what I didn't, at the end of my trip, after kind of learning about the plight of everybody there, they took me to the spot where she died. And it was this very small tree with kind of frail branches. And there was this path that was next to the tree, and they said, this is where we found this woman's body many years ago. And what I didn't know going into this was that she was 13 years old when she killed herself. I had kind of imagined a much older woman, maybe who had been walking and was just tired with life. Mm-hmm. It was a 13-year-old girl. Her name was Leta Kiros, and she had broken the clay pot, which was a valuable asset to the family. She had spilled all the water, and her best friend, who was still walking for dirty water, said, she probably was just overcome with shame that she had so carelessly slipped and fallen and let her family down and broken the pot, and they would go without water. So she took her own life. So it was a really intense experience for me. And I remember just coming back angry. How is it possible we live in a world where a guy like me can sell $1,000 bottles of champagne or bottles of water in a nightclub for $10 a pop to people who don't even open the water? And yet on the other side of the world, here's a 13-year-old girl who's walking 8 hours a day for dirty water, and then, feels like she has to take her life in despair because she slipped and she tripped. And I think for me, just being able to put I've done this so many times now. I've been to Africa over 50 times, but being able to put these individual faces to a 700 million person problem and then trying to go solve it for those individual people has kept me going, or has maybe kept the fire alive 18 years later.